Hi, I'm Rainer. Welcome to my train room. And here is another video on a DCC decoder install. This is on an old Proto 2000 switcher. I bought this switcher 25 years ago. I started the decoder install actually a few years ago as well. I took the locomotive apart. I have all the couplers and screws in here. I have the fuel tank here, and the shell has been off of it, and it's been sitting in a box because I started on the decoder install when I had my other layout set up, and then I ended up tearing down the layout before I finished doing the job. And this one looks like it's going to be a little bit more fun because it originally had directional lighting, one here and one there. And if you can see it in the camera, there are, for the rear light, there are a couple of contacts here that when you put the shell on, those contacts make contact with these two little pads on the circuit board. That's for the rear light, and then the front light is sitting right here, so it's directional lighting. But as you notice with this, there's no 8-pin plug on here like the other Proto 2000 that I recently did, because this one is before they started making things DCCs ready. So this board, all this is some diodes that allow the directional lighting to work. Really, beyond that, that's all the circuit board is for. It doesn't do anything for the motor. So what I need to do is actually just take this board right out, eliminate it, because it's not going to do me any good with the decoder in there, because this takes care of all the directional lighting in this case. So this is not going to be needed with the decoder. However, from experience, I also know that the power that this will put out will most likely blow these bulbs. So I have a choice of two things, of trying to take these bulbs and wire in resistors, or replace them with the warm white LEDs that I already have that have pre-wired resistors in them. So I'm going to see which works. This front one, I don't see much of a problem. It's a little bit tight in here, but hopefully I can fit the wires in and the LED in here. That should be okay. Once I take this board off, I'm hoping there's enough room for the decoder here, because it's a pretty tight shell. And where this gear is back here, there's not a lot of room above it here as well. So we'll see how this goes. I'm going to record all of this and see how I get through it. I do need to take this cab apart and see how it comes apart, so I can get this thing, get the other bulb out and see if I can get an LED bulb transplanted in there, and then get the wires out. So if I can get the LED bulbs in here and into the back of the cab and make sure that there's enough room for this, which there should be, then it's just a matter of soldering it and tucking the wires in. So let's see how this goes. So this locomotive ended up being a little bit more of a challenge than the last few I've done videos about in terms of converting it to DCC, largely because the body shell is a very snug fit over the chassis. There isn't a lot of extra space in there. First thing I had to do on the body shell was remove the rear railings. I took those off carefully with a set of tweezers. They are made out of very thin, soft, delicate plastic, but I had to get them out of the way so that I don't end up damaging them while taking the shell apart. Then I had to pop the cab off the body shell so I can get at the light that's up in the top of the cab. So got the cab off of the shell. Then I carefully took the floor of the cab out, and there's actually two little crew members sitting in the cab. They come out with the floor. The next piece is this clear piece of plastic that's actually the side windows, but it wraps around the top of the cab. Pop that out, and then the front and rear windows, as well as the little plastic piece that holds the light in, all popped out together. Now, at this point, I decided that I really needed to switch it all to LEDs, because trying to solder in resistors to the existing lights was just going to take up too much room, and I had the pre-resistored LEDs ready to go, so I decided to go with those. So I pulled the original bulb out of that little housing that was up in the top of the roof, and then proceeded to fit in the LED, which required cutting a little bit of plastic out around that was originally holding that bulb. and I got the LED to fit okay, and then clamped it in place with some little mini clothes pegs and glued it in with super glue. When it came to the front light, it was just glued into a groove in the metal chassis, so I just pulled it out of there and then unclipped the circuit board and removed the circuit board and the front light altogether. Now the LEDs are just a little bit thicker, especially with the resistor and the wiring on them. So what I ended up doing was using a Dremel and machining out that groove in the metal chassis just a little bit wider and deeper so that the LED bulb would fit in there and still have clearance for the body shell to fit on top. So I got that to fit okay and glued that into place in the front of the chassis. Then I didn't get video of this, but I thought I would try to fit the decoder on top of the motor right where the circuit board had been. So I actually cut a rectangular hole in the circuit board to fit the decoder and try to fit it in there, but the decoder was thicker than the circuit board, so there really wasn't enough room between the top of the motor and the body shell to fit the decoder in. So at that point I changed plans and decided that I'm going to stuff the decoder in the top of the cab. So then I just started connecting all the wires, and again, as I showed in my previous video, the red wire goes to the feed from the right side of the trucks. The black wire on the decoder goes to the feed from the left side of the trucks. And then the orange wire goes to the what was connected to the right side of the motor. So the right side feed to the motor goes from the orange wire on the decoder, and the gray wire goes to the other connection on the motor. And then I wired the LED lights in together, just left the rear light hanging on the plastic housing, taped it all down with the decoder hanging out as well, because I was going to be stuffing that up in the cab, and then I tested the whole thing on the tracks and it ran just fine. So the challenge on this was not the wiring. The wiring on this was actually fairly straightforward once I figured out how I was going to mount the lights and where I was going to put the decoder. Now, I didn't actually end up getting video of me stuffing the decoder up inside there. I was too busy trying to figure it out and forgot to turn the camera on, pretty simply. But I got it up in there, and now when you look into the cab, instead of just the two crewmen sitting in there, there's a decoder with a bunch of wire running around in there. So unfortunately I couldn't keep the cab nice and clear and looking like that, but there really isn't much room inside here because the motor goes to right to the top, and if you remember, there was these little contacts inside the shell that actually touched the circuit board on top, and the decoder was thicker than that circuit board, so there just wasn't room. I couldn't really put the decoder up there because it's on top of the truck, and the metal housing with the bulb comes right to the top, so there's no room up there. And here, if you look down, the floor of the cab comes down here to just above the rear truck, so there's no room above there. So the only place, empty space inside this shell, was inside the cab. So I just carved out a little bit of the front of the floor, kind of the floor part, and where the crew members sit. I cut a little bit larger hole to fit the wires through and put the decoder up inside there, and got it all back together, put the railings back on, and it's running just fine. So I'm glad to have this locomotive running and back on the layout. It's been sitting in a box for many years. If anybody has questions, or if you're wondering why the name and the number on the side, well, it's pretty simple. I bought this 25 years ago. My daughter was 4 years old at the time, and she was in the train room with me, and she picked the color for it, and I decided to put her age and her name on it at the time in there. It's one of those, things, working with your kids, doing stuff in the train room, and that's why it's blue, and that's why it's got a 4 on the side and has her name on the side. So that was 25 years ago. So anyway, that is what it took to fit a decoder in one of these old Pro 2000 switchers. Really, the big issue with this is the lack of space inside here, because it it's small, but it still has the same motor and things like that that the larger Proto 2000s do. So there's really no extra space in here, and the only empty space I could find was to put it up here. I suppose if somebody wanted to, you could machine a notch into the metal chassis and stuff the decoder in there. I really didn't feel like doing that, so I got it in there. It works. Front light works, rear light works, and it runs just fine. I will have more videos coming out soon, so if you don't want to miss them, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. And thanks for watching, and see you next time.